The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. A very warm welcome to everyone joining the first ever IATA Cargo Border Management webinar, which is part of the IATA Cargo Webinars Week. Welcome as well to our speakers who will provide you with an insight on the current and the future cargo border management regulations and initiatives during this 1.5 hours virtual conference. My name is Nadia Belkebir, and together with Gordon Wright, we will be your host today. Gordon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Welcome everyone to the CBM webinar today. I'm pleased to see that the number of participants registering for this event has exceeded 430. That's good to see. That hopefully means that the agenda is topical to what your concerns are today. We've got some great speakers for you today. I'll briefly introduce them. We've got Darren Hart from UK Border Force, Sherry Rosenow, who's from the WTO, and Elena Budmirovic from the World Customs Organization. In terms of housekeeping notes, just for you to know that the bio for the three speakers plus the agenda is available on the IATA webinars registration page. We've got a tight agenda, so the timekeeping, we'll try and keep to that to the best of our ability. We will try and allow time for questions if at all possible, but we are bearing in mind that we are taking an hour and a half of your day, and we intend to remain within those time frames. In terms of the topics covered today, we'll be looking at trade standards and guidance in the context of COVID-19. We'll be looking at the preloading requirements in the UK post the Brexit transitional periods, and then we'll be looking at the IATA Epic platform that looks to give visibility for the advanced cargo information and preloading information requirements and connectivity requirements. Your microphones are muted, and if you wish to submit questions, please click on the question mark icon. The event team will share your questions with the speakers during the Q&A session to the extent possible and time permitting. For your information, the webinar is recorded, and the presentations you will shortly have access to these presentations on the events webpage. Turning now to the IATA competition law compliance. It's something that we have to cover under our antitrust regulations. So just to remind everyone that the participants are cautioned that any discussion regarding matters such as fares, charges, divisional sharing of traffic or revenues, or concerning any other competitively sensitive topics outside the scope of the agenda is strictly prohibited. As a result, IATA will not answer questions pertaining to individual policies or commercial decisions and or being subject to bilateral commercial discussions between airlines and their suppliers and customers. Okay, with that in mind, I'll now pass you across to Nadia.
Thank you, Gordon. And with that, we're going to then start the conference. I would like to hand over to my colleague, Glenn Hughes, Global Head of Cargo, who will provide an update on the latest development in cargo, especially in terms of industry preparedness for distributing the COVID-19 vaccine whenever they will be available. Glenn, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Nadia, and allow me to add my welcome to those you've already heard, to all of the people who've connected today. Thank you, Nadia. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The next slide. Right. What I wanted to do is actually just illustrate some of the challenges that the industry has gone through over the last 6 months. Of course, everybody who's connected today is fully aware of the impact that the COVID pandemic has had on the aviation industry. We've seen industry aggregate revenues reduced by more than $400 billion, and the industry is forecasting a net loss of $84 billion this year. Not to mention the tens of millions of jobs that have been placed at risk because of the protracted and continuing in terms of the grounding of much of the passenger fleet and the closure of many of the passenger trade lanes. This particular chart illustrates probably the greatest differential between the fortunes of air cargo versus passenger in the last 6 months. The air cargo drop in volumes is somewhat similar to the industry drop that we experienced during the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Although if you notice, in the last few months, we've had quite a sharp bounce back, which I'll come and speak a little bit more about in a moment. Whereas the dramatic drop in passenger business and the continued drop is obviously giving cause for ongoing concern because it really impacts connectivity. And when you have a reduction in connectivity, considering that 50% of air cargo is transported in the bellies of passenger aircraft, really impacts the fortune of the air cargo industry going forward. Next slide, please, Nadia. So we have seen, as that last chart illustrated, somewhat of a bounce back from the dramatic reduction in cargo volumes, which were pretty much anticipated when you consider that 70% of the passenger fleet was grounded in that April-May timeframe. But what's really interesting to note is that the inconsistent fortunes, as it were, in the various trade lanes across the global network. For example, we actually see that the Trans-Pacific region is actually showing a growth, a net growth that's only modest of 3.7%, but year-over-year growth is incredibly impressive to see and really illustrates the fact that the US economy didn't close down to the same degree as others, and their demand for imports was actually heightened as some of the other areas, for example, imports from Europe was closed off and Asia became an even more significant exporter to North America. We're still seeing quite a reduction of cargo volumes on North Atlantic and various other trade lanes throughout the network. Next slide, please. One of the real most significant aspects that this entire last 6 or 7 month period has demonstrated, which is the need for a more flexible and agile capacity profile. You can see here the red line, which is showing freighter utilization, is running at an all-time high. And when we considered, as I mentioned a moment ago, that 50% of the cargo is roughly 50%, is normally transported in the bellies of passenger aircraft, we can see that the blue line, which is the grounding predominantly of the passenger fleet, really had an impact on air cargo, particularly at a time when demand for PPE was actually, again, fueling significant capacity shortage in many places in the world. The blue line that we're actually seeing coming through in the last few months, where it looks like a greater number of aircraft are coming back into service, the majority of that is actually where the passenger aircraft are being utilized in a cargo-only configuration. In fact, there were about 2,500 passenger aircraft utilized for cargo-only operations during the height of about six weeks ago. And we anticipate that situation continuing probably for the next 18 to 24 months, whilst the passenger network slowly resumes once there can be some harmonized restart procedures in place. Next slide, please. One of the things that, of course, has impacted when you see the situation as was demonstrated, in fact, we could just go to that last one before, just back one. Great, thank you. Is when we had that situation as just highlighted where so much capacity was actually grounded, it did obviously have a significant challenge, and we saw that industry yields were running at an all-time high. And this is, of course, a situation where the carriers tried to return as much capacity as possible to try and equalize or normalize that traditional situation, which I think they were very successful in achieving. Next slide, please. Now, moving forward, and I think as Nadia said incredibly eloquently at the beginning of the introduction, the industry is now going through the preparation phase of how to play a significant role in moving a significant number of vaccines when they are certified around the globe. We're working very closely with a number of UN agencies and other humanitarian experts who are helping the industry prepare for that eventuality. We know that there will be some very sophisticated temperature-controlled supply chains that need to be in place, and of course a strong focus on border management and border efficiency to ensure that the cargo and the consignment of vaccines can move smoothly through the network in a safe and predominantly secure environment as well, which is critical. This last slide is a reflection of the PMI, which is the Purchase Managers Index. which is really an indication as to whether or not the industry can expect to be seeing a period of contraction or expansion. The dotted line in the middle around the 50 point is really an indicative mark of saying where the economy is, as it were, normal without move either up or down. And we saw that as the aircraft and factories and economies were closed down, the PMI was at record low levels earlier on this year. But there has been a dramatic bounce back as economies have started to open. And it's actually quite a positive situation going forward, which then I think lends itself to the great program that the team has put together for today's webinar, because there are significant challenges going forward. How does the industry operate without the passenger network to actually supplement it? How will the border management challenges be overcome? How will Brexit actually play a part in this? And how will the industry connect with each other? And I think the array of speakers is excellent. The topics are great. And with that, Nadia, I thank you for the few minutes and I wish you a great remaining webinar.
Thank you, Glenn. Definitely, you know, like the distribution of vaccines and how the industry needs to be prepared is going to mobilize actually the whole cargo community. We are getting ready and sharing as much information as possible. Talking of sharing information, you can visit, we invite you to consult our cargo website, IATA cargo website, for all cargo activity, including useful information, articles, and the latest news. Let's move on to the next slides, to the next session, agenda item on our agenda, with a panel discussion, informative panel with Sherry Rose now from the World Trade Organization and Milena Budimirovic from the World Customs Organization. Hello, Milena. Hello, Sherry. Again, you can access Sherry and Milena's bios on the webinar's registration page. We will have a Q&A session at the end, and to ask your question, please click on the question mark icon, which is on the right panel of your screen. Milena and Sherry will actually share with us how the COVID-19 global pandemic affected trade, how cooperation and collaboration are key to face the crisis. The COVID outbreak is a game changer in the way we worked. We've seen it. It affected us all. Indeed, the private sector, the international organization, governments, and actually all cargo supply chain stakeholders following the outbreak all had to adapt to redefine and adjust priorities and objectives for 2020 and onwards. We've seen and we're still seeing a growing number of projects and new initiatives being launched in order to quickly and effectively respond to the crisis, to recover, but also to prepare for the post-COVID-19 era. The changes in the regulations and standards in order to be effectively applied should be shared transparently to industry stakeholders. And I have to say that the WTO and the WCO have been pretty active in diffusing, in sharing information through in addressing this crisis through a timely and accurate information. So we're going to start now the panel, and we'll start with you, Sherry. Sherry, before I'd like to discuss with you the WTO TFA. So it is widely recognized that the WTO TFA, so Trade Facilitation Agreement, is key to face the crisis and is a good catalyst as well to reduce the impact of the crisis on trade flows. We've seen articles, also a statement from member states who are supporting this idea. The Trade Facilitation Agreement entered into force in February 2017. However, developing countries and least developed countries can implement the provision of the agreement at their own pace. What can you tell us about the implementation rate of the TFA, and how do you expect COVID-19 to affect this?
Well, thank you, Nadia, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today and to provide an update on the Trade Facilitation Agreement. If you show the next slide. Well, this slide will show you that the current worldwide implementation rate of the agreement is at 66%. And if we break it down by development level, the developed countries are implementing at a rate of 100%, the developing countries at 65%, and the least developed countries at 34%. How do we know this? Well, as Nadia said, the agreement entered into force in 2017. So it's based on the assumption that the developed countries are implementing the agreement in full. And also, as Nadia said, the agreement allows developing and least developed countries to decide when they will implement each provision of the agreement. And in order to take advantage of these flexibilities, each country must provide a series of notifications so that their implementation status is transparent. And could we go to the next slide, please? So they must start by notifying each provision of the agreement in one of three categories. Provisions a country is already implementing are category A. Provisions for which it needs more time are notified in category B. And provisions for which it needs more time and donor support in category C. Now, for each of the provisions notified in categories B and C, this member also has to notify the date the provision will be implemented. So, for example, a member might put risk management in category C and notify that they will implement it no later than January 1st, 2022. And they would also have to provide information on the type of donor support they need for each of the provisions in category C. So we have received almost all the notifications from developing countries. The least developed countries had later or longer time periods to implement these notifications. But these notifications that we've received as of today give us information on the expected implementation rate of the agreement. So if we look at this chart, that the black vertical line shows us where we are today, and the dates across the bottom show implementation time periods. So that thick green bar at the bottom of the chart, that represents the category A provisions. These are the provisions members are already implementing in full, so that shouldn't change. But as of today, 50% of the provisions that have been notified by the developing and least developed countries are in A. So you can see it's it's half of the chart there. So looking again at the chart, the blue bar in the graph represents the category B provisions. And these are the provisions that members can implement without donor support, but need additional time. And members have notified around 18% of provisions in category B. Now, if you look at this blue line, you can see that some members have begun implementation of these provisions. And the red bar at the top reflects the provisions that members can only implement with donor support and time, and these are the category Cs. And about 28% of the provisions were notified in category C. So looking at this red line in the chart, you can see that implementation of these provisions is still in the early stage. Now, provisions in both category B and C will be gradually implemented over the next 8 years. So you can see it's a gradual increase, but pretty steady in the chart. There are a few notifications of implementation rates after 2029, and the last implementation date notified so far is in 2040. Now, as to the effect of COVID-19 on implementation, the agreement allows developing and least developed country members to request the extension of their notified implementation dates for categories B and C. So far, 9 WTO members have submitted requests for extension, and we expect more. Members can request an extension of up to 1.5 years beyond the original date that they notified for implementation, and without seeking approval from other members. So most of the extensions received so far, and probably most of the ones that will come in, are for an additional 1.5 years. So if the original implementation deadline was for January 1st, 2022, the new implementation date would be July 1st, 2023. It's added on to the originally notified date. Now, on the positive side, some members have expedited implementation of some of the provisions of the agreement to help cope with the pandemic, and I'll give you some examples of this in shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Milena. Thank you, Sherry, sorry. I have now a question for you, Milena, and it's about WCU support for two members. So the WCU has in place instruments and tools to help members react in situation of disruption at the borders, such as those caused by the COVID-19 for the purpose of facilitating trade. Can you tell us more about those, and what has been the initial response of the WCU?
Thank you very much, Nadia, for this question. And firstly, I would like to wish a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the delegates or attendees of this webinar around the world, and to thank IATA for the invitation to take part in this session. IATA is an important partner observer to the WCO. Now, to go back to your question around the standards, I have to say that during the pandemic, it has actually become so evident as to how important standards are in terms of trade facilitation, and that abiding by the rules is so important. And I would like to go right away to the next slide to show you some examples of standards that we have in place already for many years. And during the pandemic, what we did was very quickly set up a web page on our website and made information available to our members. And of course, encourage them. I mean, we had a lot of communication with the membership in order to address the issues that were happening at the border, such as introduction of new measures on a daily basis, closures of borders, etc. So the standards you will see, we have the revised Kyoto Convention for Simplification and Harmonization of Customs Procedures that has a special chapter dedicated to the movement facilitation of movement of relief consignments and personnel. So we have encouraged our members to abide by those standards. We also have the Istanbul Convention and specifically Annex B9 that refers to the temporary admission of these relief consignments, as well as the 2011 Council resolution on the role of customs in natural disaster relief. So this is something that we made available on our website, and of course sent communications encouraging members to work in line with the standards. If we can go to the next slide, I will give you a little bit more information on what other things we shared with the membership. First, I would like to mention that we collected a lot of members' experiences on how they were coping with the pandemic and with the issues at the borders. So we had a very good response from 115 members. We received their national practices and developed quite an extensive and rich repository with lots of trade facilitation measures. And actually, we divided them all into 4 different categories, which you see on the screen. So a group of measures to facilitate cross-border movement of relief and essential supplies, which was very relevant for this particular situation. However, under group number 2, we also included the trade facilitation measures that are so important for supply chain continuity. So it wasn't just about moving essential goods across borders, it was about keeping the economies going. So a lot of interesting and good examples of practices from our members in that regard. And I will share a little bit more on those later. But of course, there were quite a few measures relating to protection of staff as well as to protecting the society. Another thing that we did was together with the World Health Organization, we developed a number of very useful tools for members, such as the HS classification reference for medical supplies, which is available in 6 languages, the list of priority medicines during the pandemic, as well as a secretariat note, which is a sort of guidance on how to establish and to utilize essential goods lists during disaster. And this was something that was also used for something that I'm going to mention. It's not on the slide, but it's we had actually on Tuesday an online conference to mark the launching of a report on the results of enforcement operation STOP, which was carried out during the pandemic. It started in May and lasted for 63 days, and it included 99 customs administrations. So a lot of our members were on board, and we also had international stakeholders such as Europol, Interpol. We had the private sector, Pfizer, Novartis, and other companies on board. And the aim was actually to target essential medical supplies counterfeited. So there were more than 1,600 inceptions that happened then. So I would say, even though a high number, I think it's a very good result in terms of I would say improving the capacities of the customs administrations and identifying those counterfeited goods that do pose a threat to the security and health of the citizens. So with that, I would like to hand it back over to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Milena. Yes, indeed, the counterfeit of medical devices and pharmaceutical products will also be a topic that will be, I guess, especially for the custom followed up, but closely. So that's also a topic that we need as a community, the air cargo community, to bear in mind and to follow up. Mm-hmm. The next question will be for Sherry, about the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So, well, many, if not all, governments put new measures into place to deal with the COVID-19. What can you tell us about the trade facilitation related measures taken by those governments?
Well, thank you. And well, there's just so much information available, and it continues to come in. And let me start by telling you where general WTO COVID information can be found, because some of the trade facilitation notifications go there as well. And of course, the WTO is doing everything it can to support its members during the crisis to keep the goods flowing, with special emphasis on critical goods. And you can go to the next slide if you want. So there is a special COVID-19 page on the WTO.org website, where it provides up-to-the-minute trade-related information, including relevant notifications by WTO members, the impact the virus has had on exports and imports, and how WTO activities have been affected by the pandemic. So the WTO has issued a series of COVID-related information notes on a variety of topics. I'll give you a few examples. Trade in medical goods, e-commerce and COVID, helping MSMEs, I don't know if you know that term, it's micro, small, and medium enterprises, helping them navigate the crisis. Trade costs, cross-border mobility, and agriculture, just to give you some idea. In addition, the WTO asked its members to notify trade-related measures that were put in place to cope with COVID-19. And as of last week, some 280 notifications were received from around 80 countries, but probably more have come in. I saw a few new ones on the printer a few minutes ago, so I think they continue to come in regularly. Some of the measures notified put protections in place, such as export bans or new export license requirements on critical products, such as medical products, drugs, PPEs, and foods. Some are sanitary measures put in place because of the concerns that the virus could be spread through imported food products, whereas other measures are aimed at trying to keep goods flowing, such as delaying or waiving customs or VAT duties or fees, or temporarily waiving import licensing requirements. Now, more specific to trade facilitation, 12 countries led by Canada, and they're calling themselves the Ottawa Group, they have recently provided a document through the WTO Trade Facilitation Committee, providing information on the trade facilitation measures they have taken during COVID-19. Most of the measures taken are listed in the document as being put in place on a temporary basis. And you can see the 12 countries in this document in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. So I'll give you a few examples of some of the measures that they have included in this document. Enhanced access to information through a new inquiry point at customs, and establishment of email inquiries with customs officials working from home. enhanced use of technology such as greater acceptance of electronic filing of documents, acceptance of scanned copies of various types of certificates, and implementation of e-payment systems. Simplified declarations and processes for essential goods, enhanced pre-arrival processing and risk management, elimination of screening for known companies with a good record, and extension of permits and licenses for carriers. This document is a 25-page chart, so this will just give you an idea of some of the measures that have been taken. Now, India has just submitted a document that provides a list of 24 trade facilitation COVID-related measures it has taken, and it will go out today or tomorrow, so it hasn't been issued yet. For example, they are extending AEO certificates that are currently expiring. They have online issuance of a variety of certificates, and they've put a number of measures in place to simplify bonds. And we expect that more countries will issue similar documents outlining their TF and COVID procedures. And these communications will be available on our COVID-19 and trade facilitation repository, and I'll tell you where to find this in a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Maybe now let's move on to the next question for Milena. Milena, how did, let me just change the slide. Yeah. How did the WCO Customs Administration react to the COVID? Can you provide us some of the major challenges observed as well as the best practices?
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. If we can already move to the next slide. I have already mentioned that some of the biggest challenges were introduction of new measures at the borders each day, and they weren't necessarily introduced by customs, but by other agencies, national agencies. So maybe lack of coordination at national level was one thing that was lacking. Also, lack of coordination also with the private sector is another issue. But in any case, we had situations where you had border closures on one side of the border, and then this was causing, of course, huge issues in movements of goods. But there were many issues, and we have collected, as I already mentioned before, members' positive experiences, and those that could also be taken as some of the lessons learned for the future, as well as for this time of the pandemic that is still ahead of us. So we're not yet at the end of that road. And I would like to highlight some of those, I would say, good practices. In the two groups that I had mentioned before, so one is the facilitated movement of goods, of relief goods. So one of them is definitely better coordination and cooperation amongst all government agencies, and ensuring that they're all involved when it comes to introducing new measures, so that they're on the same page, that the measures that are being introduced are actually feasible on the ground, and that all the stakeholders are well informed about the new changes. Also, prioritizing clearance of relief consignments on the basis of a list of essential items is another thing. So clearing relief consignments as a matter of priority. We've seen that certain members had introduced kind of green lanes for relief goods and personnel. Providing for the lodging of simplified goods declaration or of a provisional or incomplete goods declaration. And this is in line with the revised Kyoto Convention standards, allowing the importers to then submit at a later stage a supplementary goods declaration or a complete goods declaration. If we can get the next slide, please. Also providing for pre-arrival processing of the goods declaration, and this would allow for quick release upon arrival of the goods. Using risk management, so this is one of the pillars of the modern border procedures, is using risk management and performing inspections on relief goods only if deemed high risk. Also advocating and supporting the suspension of import duties and taxes for relief items is something that we've seen quite a lot amongst our members as well, and certainly a big benefit. If we can move to the next slide. I would then share some of the good examples of, I would say, behavior of the customs administrations during the pandemic when it comes to actually supply chain continuity. So for when we're talking about goods other than essential goods and relief goods. So setting up, for instance, crisis teams to ensure that performance of customs is overall at a good level, ensuring clearance 24 hours a day, creating additional help desks. So we have already inquiry points. Most of the administrations have in place inquiry points. However, the number of questions and inquiries during the pandemic was much higher than is normal, of course, during all the taking into consideration all the changes that were happening at the border. So additional help desks to help importers and exporters. Again, risk management, always so important, and definitely ensuring that only high-risk goods are being checked, that there is more use of non-intrusive. So we saw that members were using much more NII equipment for controls. Also, ensuring that electronic copies of support documents are being accepted as much as possible. Next slide, please. And of course, introducing different tax relief measures. We saw that especially SMEs were in difficult financial situations, so allowing for extended payment deadlines is something that some of the members have introduced. Another one is related to certifications of authorized economic operators. This is something that was also especially raised by the WCO Private Sector Consultative Group. So working with our members, encouraging them to extend these certifications during the COVID, because due to the social distancing measures, it was difficult for customs officers to go on the ground to check and validate and extend the certifications. So some of the members have extended for another certain period of time these certificates. Also waiving penalties for delays that are due to late arrival of commercial documents, and removing restrictions on containers. Over to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Milena. Indeed, and it's actually echoing the introduction when I was talking about collaboration, cooperation, and communication as well, which are key to actually sustain and maintain the supply chain continuity, but also to go over the difficult time that we're going through at the moment. Sharing best practices is also a very important element. Now it's time maybe to move on to the next question for Sherry. Sherry, the WTO members are actually government, and the agreement must be implemented by government agencies. In talking as well about collaboration, cooperation, could you tell us how the private sector can get involved in the TFA implementation process during the pandemic as well?
Oh, certainly. And then we just lay the foundation a little bit. First of all, even in normal times, the private sector has a very important role to play in helping to drive reform in the area of trade facilitation, and to ensure that the provisions of the trade facilitation agreement are implemented in an effective and meaningful way. And the trade facilitation agreement provides opportunities by requiring governments to regularly consult with private sector, and to allow private sector to review and comment on proposed laws and rules, for example. And some provisions of the agreement are, excuse me, are in the nature of voluntary programs for the benefit of private sector, if they choose to use them, such as advanced rulings and authorized operator programs. And I know of some cases where a country has launched an advanced ruling program and none of the private sector used it, so it sort of faded away. In addition, the trade facilitation agreement requires all members, including developed countries, to establish a national trade facilitation committee to coordinate stakeholders and oversee implementation of the agreement. And private sector is a very important stakeholder and should be represented on all the national committees. They can advise on implementation priorities, encourage full implementation, including the provisions that only require governments to endeavor to implement, and such as e-payment and single window, and to monitor implementation. And according to a recent UNCTAD survey of 145 countries, all of those countries except 14 had functioning committees. But many WTO members have found it very challenging to keep their national committees running effectively. Of course, gaining real cooperation from the various government agencies that each have their own mandate and way of working is already a challenge, but they're finding it equally challenging how to involve the private sector. And some national committees rotate private sector participants, some include associations to represent broad membership, but almost all include the Chamber of Commerce. Now, some national committees have faced additional challenges during the pandemic. The national COVID-19 emergency committees are normally organized by the health ministry. And in some countries, the National Trade Facilitation Committee is invited to participate, but often not in a structured way. And trade issues are sometimes treated in a haphazard manner. Some of these national committees faltered when everybody was working from home, and they're now trying to refocus. However, other committees were active during the crisis and helped coordinate agencies to expedite implementation of many provisions of the agreement, but often these are implemented on a temporary basis. But the committees have an especially important role during the crisis to ensure cooperation, communication, and automation of the border processes. And the private sector can play a very important role now to push governments to keep trade reform on track, to make sure that trade facilitation initiatives that were implemented on a temporary basis during the crisis are formalized, and to help committees review their priorities to better cope with the current situation and prepare for the vaccine and recovery stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you. Milena, talking about collaboration, the WCO as well has a good collaboration with the private sector, right? And actually through the private sector consultative group. Can you tell us more about the significance of this cooperation during the COVID?
Yes, of course, Nadia, if we can just move to the slide. During the pandemic, so we have in place, it's a WCO private sector consultative group, which advises the Secretary General, the Policy Commission, and the Council on issues related to trade from a private sector perspective. And the PSCG has 27 members. IATA is one of the members, a very, I would say, active member of the PSCG, and we have representatives from all 6 regions of the WCO. We have both private sector associations and private sector companies. We have small businesses, bigger businesses, so it's really a variety of different members. Normally, the PSCG meets maybe twice or 3 times a year in Brussels, and usually back to back to one of our meetings with the Safe Working Group. However, during the pandemic and taking into consideration the emergency situation that we had, the PSCG was actually meeting once a week from early April. It then reduced to 2 weeks at some point. Now it's once a month, but definitely much more frequently than usual. And these meetings were now being attended from WCO side by our Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, and Council Chairperson. So definitely a lot of importance was given to that collaboration and ensuring that we work together on identifying issues, on identifying possible solutions and communicating those to the customs community. So we held many meetings during that period, and I would like to highlight a number of different papers or I would say documents that came out of that that were communicated to the customs community, such as ideas for the WCO and its members from the PSCG group. and these related to different measures that customs can take in order to simplify and harmonize customs procedures during the pandemic. How to keep officers safe, how to further ensure business continuity or supply chain continuity. And those were, as I said, communicated to our membership. The PSCG has also very much contributed to further developing or updating the validation and implementation guidance for our authorized economic operators. And this has started through the initiative that I mentioned already earlier about AO certifications needing to be further extended for a certain period of time, and looking into carrying out potentially remote validation. So how can that be done in order to ensure continuity of these AO certificates? The PSCG is also working on the lessons learned through the pandemic, and we're really looking forward to this paper and are closely involved in that process, or are more monitoring. So we're involved in the sense that we're listening to what the PSCG is telling us around issues on the ground and trying to find solutions. We also work with the SMEs as well. So during this period, on the occasion, I would just like to highlight this, on the occasion of the SMEs Day, I think it was 27th of June, we issued a secretariat note that was again giving more importance to the SMEs in terms of ensuring that their interests are being taken into consideration, as they were especially vulnerable during the pandemic. So with that, I would like to end this intervention on private sector cooperation.
Thank you, Milena. Indeed, yes, it's again about communication, collaborating, receiving input from the private sector, taking it into consideration, and working together to make sure that, as we say at IATA, we make it happen. So next question, Sherry, please. Let me just check. So it's about the Trade Facilitation Agreement Facility. The WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement Facility has a number of COVID-19 related resources on its website. Could you please provide us with some information on these resources, and in particular, the result of the Trade Facilitation Survey and COVID, Trade Facilitation and COVID Survey, as well as the repository of resources that we collaborated all together to work on this repository: IATA, WCO, WTO, of course, and other organizations.
Okay, certainly. Yes, this spring, when the virus was sweeping its way around the globe, we asked government officials and private sector from around the world to answer a short survey about trade facilitation and COVID-19. And we conducted this survey in partnership with the International Chamber of Commerce and Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation. So of the 199 people that completed the survey, 60% were from private sector, 25% from government, and 16 identified themselves as other, such as customs agents, freight forwards, logistics, Chamber of Commerce, and a few others. And we asked respondents to consider the 6 trade facilitation processes that are shown here on the left side of the screen, although they're not showing very well. So I'll say them quickly. And then we asked them 3 questions about these 6 trade facilitation processes. They are access to trade-related information, import-export documentary requirements, import-export controls, for example, tests and inspections, release and clearance of goods, border agency cooperation and coordination, freedom of transit, and then we always had an other. So the first question, looking at these 6 trade facilitation processes, are which have become more cumbersome or time-consuming during the pandemic, which are less cumbersome, and which, if implemented, would improve the situation. So the graph in this slide shows the results for the processes that have become more cumbersome. So as you can see, the survey respondents found that all processes have become more cumbersome and time-consuming. However, import-export controls such as tests and inspections were identified as the most problematic, but by a relatively small margin. And then the second question of which of these processes are less cumbersome or time-consuming, access to information was identified as less cumbersome. Some respondents remarked that increased video conferencing with traders, brokers, and agents was less burdensome than meeting face-to-face. However, a number of respondents selected other and stated that none of the processes have improved during the crisis. And the third question is, which of these processes, if implemented, would be most beneficial during the pandemic? And it was clear that border agency and access to information were the clear choices of the respondents. So a key conclusion of this survey is that full implementation of the Trade Facilitation Agreement can help alleviate most of these problems. Full implementation means implementation of all the provisions, including best endeavor provisions, as I mentioned before, like e-payment at single window. And the report on this survey sets out details of the different provisions of the agreement. And full details of the results are in this study as well, and the results are broken out by region, country development level, and sector. And they can be found on our website, and I'll show you where in just a minute. The next slide, please. So also on our website is a repository of trade facilitation and COVID-19 related resources. And we found that most of the trade facilitation partner organizations and associations have been creating new resources to help governments and private sector cope during the pandemic. And IATA and the Commonwealth Secretariat actually initiated the idea of creating one source for this information and asked to host it on our website. And the repository currently includes resources from some 30 partner organizations and associations. And they cover land, sea, and air, animal, plant, and grain, multiple international organizations, as Nadia said, all IATA and WCO and IPPC and World Bank and a number of others. It currently contains around 350 resources, including instruments, tools, reports, case studies, and articles, to name a few. And it is searchable by organization, keyword, and type of information. So hopefully you can quickly find what you're looking for. And we continue to add new participating organizations and resources to this. So we hope it will continue to grow. And this is also where you can find many of the documents that I mentioned today, such as that Ottawa document of the 12 countries that notified their resources or what they put into place during COVID-19. So if you could go to the next slide. Just in case some of you aren't familiar with the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement facility, it was created to assist the WTO developing and least developed country members find the support they need to implement the Trade Facilitation Agreement. So part of the way we do this is by making a lot of information available through our website. And you can see the website address at the top, tfafacility.org. And in addition to the survey report and repository, we have information on donor programs. We have a collection of guidelines and case studies for each provision of the agreement under the Trade Facilitation Resources tab. And if you're interested, you can explore. I won't take the time to tell you everything about that's on there now. But you can also find contact information for the National Trade Facilitation Committees if you go under the contact points and profiles. So in case you're interested in finding out what's going on in your country with the national committees and seeing about getting involved. And if you are interested in taking a look at the notifications from countries where you do business, you can look up each country's notification and see exactly what provisions they put in A, B, and C, what their implementation dates that they notified, and what their technical assistance needs are. So you can also find this information on the website on the bottom of the slide called tfadatabase.org, and look under WTO members, and you can also find a wealth of statistics, charts, and graphs from all the notifications there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Milena, as well, the WCO participated in the development of the COVID-19 repository. Can you give us some more information about the example of international collaboration, international initiatives with the WCO, and in which they were involved other initiatives?
Yes, sure. And yes, if we can go already to the next slide.
Yes.
I will not talk about the repository, but I would like to thank IATA, who has jointly with the Commonwealth Secretariat initiated this repository, which we feel is very, very useful. So we're happy to be contributing, and it reminds us to be up to date with the contribution of information as well, in order to stay relevant. So, but of course, during the pandemic, we have initiated and have worked closely with a lot of international organizations in terms of addressing the issues that were related to the pandemic and to relief consignments. We worked, I already mentioned, with the World Health Organization on developing a number of tools. We also worked with the UN OCHA and the IFRC. We did also joint statements, and we did the initiatives that and actions that followed these joint statements with the World Trade Organization, with the International Maritime Organization, with OTIF and OSJD, who cover two intergovernmental organizations that cover railway transport, the UPU, ICC, IRU. So there were a lot of initiatives that required where we were involved together with these organizations, making sure that we're covering different modes of transport and addressing the different needs of our membership of 183.
Thank you, Milena. So the last question now for Sherry would be about, actually, there's a committee at the WTO. Just me change the slide. There's a committee at the WTO that has oversight of the TFA. Could you give us more information on the role of this committee and what you expect to happen in the upcoming meeting that is going to be held next soon?
Certainly, yes. Well, in addition to requiring national committees, the agreement establishes a committee at the WTO, and it is made up of all WTO members. Countries joining can take part as well. It gives a responsibility to oversee implementation of the Trade Facilitation Agreement to this committee. Now, each WTO agreement has a dedicated committee, and one important role is to provide a forum for members to raise issues with other members. And the idea is to try and resolve the issues at the committee level so they don't go on to the dispute settlement body. However, the Trade Facilitation Agreement is new. So the Trade Facilitation Committee meetings focus on three main areas right now: notifications, sharing of experiences, and implementation support. And the next meeting of this Trade Facilitation Committee will be held October 20th to 22nd, so coming up in 2 weeks. It will start with a review of all the notifications that have been received since the last meeting. And in addition to these ABC notifications and the time extensions that we've already talked about, all WTO members must notify where they publish information, the contact points for their inquiry points, and whether they require mandatory use of customs brokers or not, and a description of the operation of the single window. Of course, all of this is online if you want to find out a country's situation. Now, normally at the committee meeting, we go through notifications one by one, so members can make comments. And the comments can be congratulatory or thank you very much, or a member might ask for more information or urge faster implementation if they think the implementation date is too long. It is clear that the pandemic did not slow down members' work on their notifications, because we have received around 100 since the last committee meeting last February. Then the next item on the agenda is a sharing of best practices. This is on a voluntary basis. Members, no, go back a slide, please. Members share their experience in implementing provisions of the agreement. And normally all presentations are available on the website after, in case you're interested. Now, in the upcoming meeting, A group of 5 landlocked countries will present on transit during COVID-19, and we'll have other reports on implementation of the time release study, e-long room, an emerging digital customs strategy, measures adopted during the crisis concerning proof of preferential origin, and a paper on accelerated implementation I'll mention in just a minute. And the third day of this meeting is dedicated to discussions on issues concerning implementation support. And this is where a country can raise an issue if they're not getting the support they need to implement the agreement. We expect a strong focus on COVID-19 throughout the meeting. And now if you could go to the next slide, I'll just close by telling you about a new document that you might find of interest. The US, Brazil, and Colombia just recently issued a paper through the WTO committee with a very long title, supporting the timely and efficient release of global goods through accelerated implementation of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. This document urges members to expedite implementation of the Trade Facilitation Agreement and asks them to commit to accelerating implementation of, in particular, these 8 provisions that you see listed on this slide. And we don't have any further information on this proposal yet. The paper was just circulated last week, and it will be for discussion at the upcoming meeting. But if you want to find a few more details about it, you can find it in the repository. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. And so noted for the upcoming meetings, and we are looking forward to learning more about the outcomes. Milena, a last question before we finish that panel, we end that panel. Could you tell us more about the WCO's upcoming meetings and event?
Yes, so just to say that the WCO has, during the pandemic, moved into a very virtual mode. So we've moved to carrying out our committee meetings in a blended, we call it blended manner, where we're using our Click platform, WCO platform, to collect inputs from the members, their interventions regarding different agenda items in our meetings. And then we're having like a dedicated session through a video conferencing facility. And through these meetings, the COVID-19 topic is being discussed throughout. So that's now a very important topical thing. One of the things that we're now discussing through our permanent technical committee, which is our key committee responsible for procedures and facilitation, is in fact the development of guidelines, WCO guidelines regarding customs and how customs can react in situations of different disruptions. So not just the COVID, but any other that we may predict. And this is actually being led by a project funded by the Customs Cooperation Fund of Japan. So we have now a dedicated project with 2 members of staff who are leading on this initiative. But I would like to also mention something that would be, I think, more of interest to this audience here today. I would like to mention, and if we can just turn to the next slide, our TechCon webinar that will take place from 11th to 13th of November, which will be looking into technology for customs in the time of the pandemic and what have we learned. I hope a lot, so we will be covering topics such as e-commerce, which has grown so exponentially during the COVID. We will be looking at electronic services, teleworking. How are we going to be working in the future, customs administrations, etc., inspection equipment and keeping officers safe. So I think very interesting topics that very much relate to what is of interest to the customs administrations at this point in time. And we have, this is actually like, I would say we have on a yearly basis already for 18 years a technology conference. So this year we're not holding it in a member administration, we're holding it online, but we will try to bridge that gap in terms of providing our members with interesting insights on technology solutions at this very moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Milena. Conscious of the time, we're going to finish this panel. To end this panel, I would like to thank you very much, Sherry and Milena, for the useful information that you shared with our participants. We will have the slides available on our website. So the next session is a presentation from Darren Hart from UK Border Force, followed by a discussion with Gordon. Gordon, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Nadia. I can see that a number of questions did come in, but in the interest of time, unfortunately, we weren't able to get to those. But what we will do is those individuals who ask the questions, we will ensure that we reach out to the panelists to get a response for you and communicate that to you. So together with obviously the pandemic, the two other topics that are very much foremost in our mind at the moment is supply chain safety. And we touched on that with the movement of vaccines and so on, but also security. And security, there should be no reduction in security controls moving forward, regardless of what we're facing around the world. One that the industry has been very much involved in is preloading requirements cross-border. We've been very heavily involved in developing the international standard together with the WCO and other partners, and actually helping with the national implementation. The UK, as it moves from the transitional period into Brexit, is looking to implement their preloading program on an incremental scale. And I'm pleased to say that we've got a great speaker for you, Darren Hart, who's the head of Border Force Freight Industry Engagement Team, Freight Data and Preloading Targeting Development Lead. And Darren, it's difficult to think of anything else you couldn't be in charge of. But having said all that, would you like to make your presentation, and then we'll move, time permitting, to a series of questions. Darren, over to you.
Gordon. Thank you. I am but a minor cog in a very big machine. So, but thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. As Gordon said, my name's Darren Hart. I work for the United Kingdom Border Force, which is the equivalent of the Australian Border Force or the Canadian CBSA, CBP. So we're responsible for immigration and customs and some national security functions at the UK frontier. And I'm going to talk to you very briefly this afternoon for no more than minutes or so on our preload data-informed cargo targeting project. So next slide, please, Nadia. I was very lucky back in 2018 to talk to you about our preload initiative at that time, Predict. And so today, my aim is to give you an update on what's happened since we last spoke in 2019, a couple of slides on that, and then in 2020, what we've been doing this year and what we look to do next year. So next slide, please, Nadia. The slide I always start these presentations off is the one I call my reassurance slide. There's lots of noise out there about why we're doing preload targeting and the benefits of preload targeting. But in many ways, what's written down the right hand or the left hand side of the slide is our commitment of what we're doing and how we're taking it forward. The first thing we're doing is that we're working always within the ICAO and the WCO agreed principles. And we spent a lot of time involved in that piece of work. Excellent piece of work, good viewpoints from many people in there, and we're sticking to that quite religiously. Again, in terms of the data sets, I hear things such as 10+2 or 2+3 or whatever. We stick to the industry agreed reduced data set of 7+1, consignee name, consignee address, consignor name, consignor address, cargo description, piece count, total weight, and a unique identifier, normally the airway number. That doesn't mean we won't take more data. That doesn't mean we won't process and use that as part of our risking systems. But at the end of the day, that's the minimum data set and the data set we're looking to use. Again, following on from my first commitment, we are looking at using recognized standards for messaging in terms of the ones that have been developed so far by ICAO and WCO. A question that I always get asked, and it's always the same answer, what are you targeting? Well, for preload, we're targeting a single risk only, and that is aviation security, that bomb in a box situation that could cause a catastrophic event on one of our aircraft or one of your aircraft. Again, one of the reasons why I'm delighted to do this piece of work, is one of the many areas I'm involved in, is because it's where industry consultation really does play a huge part. At two levels, you know your business better than I do, so it's important to understand your processes. But also as well, we are working towards the same mission on this, which is protect aviation. Next slide, please, Nadia. Okay, so I mentioned 2019. We were very fortunate. We got invited to send 8 targeting officers out to the United States of America's National Targeting Center, run jointly by their Customs and Border Protection Agency and their Transportation Security Agency. Again, due to the fantastic relationship we have with IATA and the carriers, we were able to secure voluntary data from 9 industry partners, 6 traditional carriers, 2 out of the 3 largest fast parcel operators, and a freight forwarder. And they all provided UK Nexus data. So that's consignments either destined to the United Kingdom or through the United Kingdom. And in total, over that 6-month period, we handled 9 million shipments. Next slide, please, Nadia. Okay, a little bit more detail around that. And essentially what we were looking to prove is not so much the concept, but could we do it? Could we undertake automated risk assessment, review those hits by a human being, and get those hits arbitrated and determined within a specified time limit? And we could. We were quite pleased with our 8 officers. We were able to do that. Probably most exciting of all is that we agreed with one of the 2 fast parcel operators that we would try some test purchasing. We would try to put 2 data relating to 2 bomb-like intelligence packages through the systems, and could our officers identify them and do the appropriate action? Very nerve-wracking, because after 6 months of doing this, if it didn't work, then we had some an interesting situation. I'm pleased to say that they did work, and the officers found both those two packages. Interesting stat: 95% of total shipments came from the 2 fast parcel operators. So really important to stress that the role of the fast parcel operators, the sheer number of consignments they carry, is of great interest to us. Data quality is key. In many ways, a lot of our referrals were due just to data quality issues. If we can get the data quality higher, it basically meant we'd issue less RFIs. One of the interesting facts that came out of it, I was doing some work last night just looking at the stats, is when it came to how many we actually issued RFIs, requests for informations, compared to the 9 million shipments that we had. It came out at 0.0007% of all consignments. So as we've discussed at previous seminars, an RFI, request for information, or the moving off that request for screening, is very much the rarity rather than the norm in that sense. So thank you, Nadia. Next slide. Okay, so that was so much for 2019. In 2019, sorry. In 2020, we came back from the US just before the pandemic hit, so that was a good thing. And we started to set up our own system. We're building it as part of our Cerberus system. I'll talk more about that in a bit, but it is live. We now have a preloading minimal viable product. So in terms of automated risking and that sort of work, we are now live, the second one live after the US. We are connected. We've done a huge amount of work with IBM to get the right type of connectivity in place. One of the things we learned from the US is that we do need an IBM MQ client connector, so we've got one. In terms of data, our initial target is to get 7 carriers online by March next year, and then have a program of carriers scheduled through to 2022. One of the things I've been very keen to do is to make sure we are fully GDPR compliant and our own Data Protection Act compliance, and to make sure that our legal people are happy with what we're doing there. And that's taken a lot of work, and I'm pleased to say they do. In terms of operation, it is live. We have recruited a number of officers to do this, and we are recruiting more officers to do that as we speak. It's going to be a phased implementation. We're using agile project management. So therefore, we move from our minimal viable product at the moment with one-way messaging towards a 2-way messaging within international standards during the course of next year. Again, that's been the result of close collaboration between us and IATA. Only this morning, Tahir was talking to my people about how we do that 2-way messaging back, And between us, we produce a joint implementation guide / interface control document, which is a good piece of work, which is in its final stages of preparation and be with you soon. Next slide, please, Nadia. Just a little bit about why we've put this within our Cerberus system. And this is because the United Kingdom is taking the next step, or the next generation, in its border risk assessment capabilities. Many customs agencies, border agencies around the world rely on what we call scenario-based targeting, where you put in a scenario, such as mangoes coming from London, run those scenarios through your system, and you find mangoes coming from London. However, within that scenario, we might be looking for various commodities such as cocaine, heroin, etc. But it doesn't cover the entire range of risks that we have within that, and also as well, and probably more importantly, we stop a lot of mangoes. So the first thing we're looking at doing is that the data you're providing, and this is one of the reasons why the GDPR and the data protection assets has been so important to us, is that we're networking your data with a whole load of other data sets, both government data sets. So what do we know from our systems, from open source data sets, and also with other industry data sets. So although it might be the first time that you've seen a particular consignment, is it the first time that that consignment's crossed the UK frontier? The second part with this, and the part that really excites me, is that we're introducing advanced data analytics. I just mentioned the mangoes coming from London and the potential to have cocaine in there. Well, let's look beyond that. Let's look at the entire data set and see where the real intelligence is, what the real patterns are, and where the outliers of that behaviours are to identify the real risk out there. So we're looking at the system giving us a much richer idea of the risk. I'll also flip this a little bit around on its head. I think in terms of targeting and risk assessment, which I've been involved in for the best part of 15, 16 years now, border agencies, customs agencies, frontier agencies are very good at identifying the bad stuff. What we're not so good at is identifying the good stuff. So we're looking at using our system not just to identify what is of interest to us, but also to be able to green lane large bulk parts of the industry which aren't of interest to us, and use our resources towards those higher risk areas rather than the lower risk ones. So in summary, our system Cerberus is going to provide that quantum leaping capabilities going forward. Next slide, please, Nadia. So what next in terms of where we're going from 2020 onwards? More international partnerships. As you know, the WCO Safe Committee happened, the working group happened last week. We're involved in that. We're talking to the WCO about preload targeting. We're still talking to our friends within the European Union and the development of their ICS2 system. And of course, we're still talking to the US colleagues and also our Canadian colleagues and anybody who's interested in this particular this world. Better data quality tools, as I mentioned, that's all a gain for us in that sense, because it means that we can reduce those false positives and stop what we need to stop, and not necessarily what we've been stopping before. I'm very, very keen, and one of the reasons why I'm delighted to be here today is we can't do this alone. It requires more industry consultation. One of the guys that works to me, Ian Dibble, has set up this week through IATA an airline consultative committee where we can start to float ideas, suggestions out there within the airline and carrier community about what works and what doesn't work. And of course, more carriers. When we get up to 7, we'll quickly be moving on that to other carriers as well. So we're very keen to take that growth as we go forward. Next slide, please. And I think that's the final slide, isn't it? Yeah. That's Cerberus. That's our three-headed dog that guards the underworld, apparently.
There we go. Thank you, Dan, for that very interesting presentation. We fully agree with you, all the comments that you've made. I think it's quite clear that what makes this program successful to date is the fact that there's been great cooperation between the airlines, IATA, together with working with you and your colleagues from the Home Office and so on. We would encourage all carriers to participate as we move forward, because it's a good learning process and we've learned from things that have occurred in the past and as we've gone along. Darren, we've only got enough time, unfortunately, for a couple of questions. And what I'm going to do is dispense with the easy ones and ask you some more complicated ones just to keep you on your toes.
Okay.
One of the business models that has been out of preloading so far is post. And some concern has been raised, I know, within government authorities about that. So my question to you is, when will postal shipments be part of the UK's preloading programme? And will you follow the same business model, post to post, similar to the EU?
Thank you, Gordon. So at the moment, post is the gap with most people's pre-arrivals capabilities and basically everyone's preloading capabilities. I was fortunate, I spent quite a bit of time working with the EU on their ICS2 model, so I was able to influence that in the postal world, and therefore understand the post-to-post model. And to be frank, we like it. We think it works for us. We know there's gaps in the process, and there's ongoing conversations discussed at the Digital Cargo Conference a few days ago that they were discussed as well. But we need to work together to fill those gaps and figure out the best way forward. We are talking to a postal operator. It's unfair of me to say which one, but probably is obvious, about trialing some stuff early next year. We do have a cut of postal data within our systems already to understand how that works, a 6 months data cut, to understand how it works and how post data works. But yeah, very much so. We're looking next year to start looking at getting postal in the system, recognizing the challenges and the difficulties with that. But again, pushing it back out to our colleagues in the postal world and the aviation world to understand how we take that forward. I think what's particularly exciting for me is that, we are ahead of the EU ICS2 model on that one, and therefore we'll be going first potentially on that, which is exciting but also a bit scary.
Okay, thank you, Darren. And final question for you, one that we've received in. This was a feature of the ACAS model. It was this process of informed compliance. So after the regulation is published, airlines are compelled to file their preloading data, but regulators basically go easy on them for a period so that they can sort out their bugs in the system and so on. Will the UK be looking for something similar?
Absolutely. So at the moment, we've taken the deliberate path not to legislate at this time. As you know, there's something else going on in the UK at the moment, which is causing quite a few changes in legislation. We won't be talking about that. But in essence, our approach was very similar to the US. As you can imagine, working very closely with them, we are influenced by their faults and their lessons learned from the past. We're not looking to legislate anytime soon. And I think what's fair to say is that the carriers that are involved earlier on will get more influence in how we do this, because we're learning at the same time. Because it is a minimal viable product that we're building an agile development, we're not going to be in a situation where we build a system and then say, well, we can't change the system because that's how we built it, even if we find something that works better for us. So very much along the lines of, we build it together, we build it in partnership at some point in the future. And there are no official timescales for this, but it won't be the next couple of years. We start to build that legislation. And again, the UK way of doing it is building that legislation in consultation with industry as well. So very much industry's got a huge part to play today in this. Thanks,
Darren. And thanks again for your presentation. Unfortunately, we can't take any more questions at the moment, but again, if we have any questions that are outstanding, we'll come to you and ask a response so that we can share them with the person who's posed the question. Nadia, can I pass the floor back to you?
Thank you, Gordon, and thank you, Darren, for a very interesting presentation and learning more, getting the chance to learning more about the Predict program. Our next and last session will be a presentation from our colleague Tahir Syed, who is Manager Cargo Technology. Tahir will provide us with a brief presentation of the IATA Enhanced Partner Identification Connectivity Platform, commonly known as Epic. Tahir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Darren, very interesting presentation. While you were explaining the Predict program and sharing your approach, the consultancy you are doing with the industry, engaging IATA and other airlines, I think half of the audience, they were thinking, what would be the impact on me if I don't comply to this new regulation? I have one, the first slide. I thought, although UK is not going to force any penalty or stop the cargo immediately after the launch of this predict, but this is the consequence that what happened is if airline they are not compliant, so generally cargo is stopped at the border, obstacles in custom clearance, sanctions or penalties, and poor quality declaration will be either rejected or subject to unnecessary interventions. Nadia, can we move to the next slide? So whenever any custom authority or government comes up with any initiative, there are certain actions that need to be performed by the airlines. They need to adopt the business rules. They need to take steps to have the precise data quality, develop or update IT systems for exchanging information, providing training and support for the staff. And what custom authority or the government authority they are looking for is 100% compliance, improved data quality, timely submission, and the adherence to the business processes and the business rules. So while the custom has this intention, on the airline side, normally IATA, they receive hundreds of questions. And these questions are, what are the required data types? What are the required versions? How to connect? Amendments allowed? What is the testing period? Informed compliance period? Where to address the issue? And there is $1 million question, where to find all this information? So, and this has been happening not only for Predict, but with any ACI or PLASI initiative. These are some of the common questions keep coming again and again. So learning from the past, when these PLASI initiative, they start coming up, what IATA has done is IATA has launched a centralized platform, a global database for maintaining and distributing air cargo stakeholder digital connectivity information. This is available through a web portal and also through a web service that could be integrated with your IT system. And what you can do here is in this centralized platform, you can search different government and custom authorities, their connectivity method, their business rules, supported messages, their versions, and most of all, you can have the contact person for any queries. Also, this platform allows you to distribute your connectivity information with the business partner. We have plans to provide the permanent IDs. You can share your capabilities, and it has complete access control implemented. So one can decide that if want to share the data with certain partners or not. Then, as I mentioned, there is a centralized portal as well as there is a web service. So this is how Epic works. It has, we have included many notifications as well. So if anyone wants to participate in the Predict pilot with the UK Border Force, they can search UK Border Force and then they can initiate a request to Darren and team for connectivity. So we have implemented a dashboard, and in that dashboard you can actually measure that how much time it is taking to respond. So there is a complete list of features. Due to time, I won't be going into the details, but there are a number of features available in the Epic, a number of benefits. The first and foremost benefit is it saves a lot of cost and time. Many airlines who have started using it, they are saying it could save 40% time of a permanent resource, and the information is centrally available. There are many other important benefit, process optimization, time gain, so on and so forth. Epic was launched earlier this year, exactly when the pandemic started in March. still we managed to make progress. We have altogether around 50 companies using Epic platform. It is listed 27 airlines. This information is as of yesterday. We now have around 30 airlines, and then we have 8 or 10 custom authorities. We have 10, 12 IT companies who have joined. So complete list is available on the Epic website. If we could go to the last slide, Nadia. So here is the earlier plan was to give you a demo, but due to the time restrictions, here is just a snapshot of the Epic platform where you can search a particular stakeholder. You can check their capabilities. So in this example, you see Transport Canada example is given. They are using a web service. They have mentioned the website with the implementation and business rules, and their supported messages types. Similar information is available for UK Border Force and some other custom authority, and in future you will see more and more custom authorities to be part of this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tahir. Tahir, I always find it quite interesting with the Epic platform because it's one of the few IT applications that I actually understand. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at this. It really is beneficial for both the private sector and the public sector. Thank you for the presentation and trying to stick to the time frame. So it leaves it up to me to really wrap up and close this session today. First of all, I'd like to thank the great panelists that we've had today, Sherry, Melina, and of course, Darren. Also, thanks to Glenn for giving us that international outlook on where we are with air cargo, the good news, the bad news, the challenges, and so forth. I think everyone would have found it interesting to see the pace that some of the international organizations are moving at, in particular the TFA and what, the World Trade Organization, what they're doing in terms of the COVID-19 measures, guidance and standards they put into place, and also for hosting the repository that everyone seems to be benefiting from. Also from the WCO, we had a good explanation of the existing tools they've got for dealing with pandemics and these sorts of emergencies, but also some of those that they've recently developed. And again, from an IATA perspective, I can really speak to the speed that they've done that within. I've never seen anything like that before, and I hope that will continue going forward. I think we also learned a lot about the value of including the private sector in collaborating with both the World Trade Organization, World Customs Organization, and Customs. And I think we had a good example from Darren on the work that ourselves and the airline and other supply chain partners have done with the UK Predict, their preloading program. As well as thanking the panelists, I think I should also thank Nadia, my colleague. She put together a great program for you today. So thank you, Nadia, for doing that. I hope everyone found it interesting and rewarding. As mentioned, all of the slides will be made available on our website and the recording of this webinar. If you're interested in knowing a bit more general about air cargo, you can register for our monthly update, the IATA Cargo Tracker. You can also send an email to cargo@iata.org or going to the IATA Cargo website. If it's specific information that you're looking for in terms of cross-border restrictions, guidelines, standards, then I'd encourage you to register for the Cargo Border Management Bulletin that is issued on a regular basis, and you can contact either Nadia and myself in that regard. With this, I'd like to thank again the panelists and all of you attending. I hope you found discussions useful and interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.